What do you see, if any, possible exit strategy regarding what is going on in Ukraine? I do think that this is just this is another Iraq waiting to happen regarding just this constant entrenched warfare that could go on for years and years and billions upon tens of billions of dollars between the military industrial complex conglomerates all over the world, just trading God knows what back and forth. How do you see that currently unfolding as we go forward and entering, I believe, the 8th month now that this war is going on?
Yeah, I think they actually invaded in February.
So 9. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, as we talk about the political front, I remember when I was fearful of Republicans coming in because I said we're going to be at war. And now, believe it or not, I worry about the Democrats. It seems as though, it just doesn't matter. And I guess it's that military industrial complex that we always talk about. But, in regards to Ukraine and the out, I've been telling folks that, it's part of the Cold War that never ended. And we were instigating that. How we got into war. And I always like to say this. I'm anti-war, but I'm not anti-defending yourself. But at the same time, as Ukraine tried to defend themselves, we're pushing them on. We have a security interest. And likewise, Russia has a security interest. And if you look back in history, I think it was 2008, Ukraine tried to get accepted into NATO. And I think it was France and Germany who resisted that. United States, guess what? We were all for it. But we have to think about that. Russia has an interest, a security interest. And that would have put Ukraine, which is a buffer right now between the East and the West, that would have put, possibly nuclear weapons and a foe right next to Russia's border. And so they had been talking for the longest that, hey, listen, do not accept, when you talk about Taiwan, we'll talk about Taiwan here in a few minutes too, and the president's recent visit. But if you try to accept Ukraine into NATO, that's a red line for us. And they've been telling us that's for the longest because it never was written, I'm told, but it was a verbal agreement that once, Gorbachev and Reagan, this wall, tear this wall down. When it was torn down, we said we would not expand NATO. Well, guess what? We broke that. Now, we're using Ukraine, the United States of America, to fight that Cold War physically now. And I saw something when we talk about war and peace and diplomacy. I saw a caption of something, $8 billion to fight a war in Ukraine, $3 billion to Israel, $1 billion to Taiwan, but yet the people of Jackson, Mississippi have to beg for drinking water. Now think about that. And so where do we end? As I shared with someone in a conversation yesterday, there's been no diplomatic conversations going on right now. It's all about how much we pour in there. And it's all about us and our imperialistic view of that we're going to tear Russia down. We're going to beat them. And what do you think Russia feels? How do you think they feel about that? And so, the only thing that's going to save us right now is that we're going into the winter season and we're going to probably have a lag, in the war, and it'll probably pick back up next year unless there's some diplomatic conversations. Now, I don't know this, it's just an opinion. I've noticed that Russia, has given up some of the territory they had captured. And I'm thinking deep down that is their way of trying to back down. And I think this is a time now for us to grab that opportunity and try to have some diplomatic and peaceful, conversations right now. And I saw something today. I think General Milley, our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff currently, I think he agrees with that too, because I heard something, he's more on the diplomatic. What the ironic thing about this, we have the State Department that's talking about continuous military aid to Ukraine to continue to fight a war. And you have the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the senior military officer, talking about, let's look at diplomatic options.
And yet our Congressional Progressive Caucus sent a very sort of nicely requested letter asking President Biden to could you consider maybe talking to them? I mean, we'll still support it, but and then 24 hours later, retracted that very pleasantly worded letter. So I find it very interesting that there are people in the military system that are encouraging that, but yet our representatives just could not stand the course on that. It's so disappointing.
Well, let's jump back into when you were talking about Veterans Day, which we celebrated on Friday. It's easy for members of Congress and administrations to talk about war and keeping us in these sustained wars, but it's off the backs of the men and women of the military. We celebrate Veterans Day, once a year. I guess we even call it Armistice Day as well. But, we have a tendency, we send our folks off the war, but yet when they come back, we see many of them that's homeless right now. We see many that are fighting to get in certain VA facilities, for their care. So, we like to talk about war. We like to talk tough. I'm talking about members of Congress, both parties. But yet, when it comes to our veterans, we have a hard time. We should have no homeless veteran. That's just my opinion. There are going to be some, you just can't help. But I think we should, remember I talked about that $8 billion, that $3 billion, and that $1 billion? Where is some of that for our homeless veterans that went off and fight these wars? I don't know this to be sure, but I do know that we have some folks, American folks, when I say American, actually military folks that are probably, close to the front lines in Ukraine. The ones we see on television, the ones that's been captured, they volunteer, private citizens and so forth. But we're going to have, some folks indirectly, if they're deployed, let's say, for instance, in Poland or Ukraine itself are not fighting in the war, they're going to get injured. There's going to be something that's going to happen. They're going to get injured. What happens when they come back home? We need to have more days of supporting and thanking our veterans, other than just that one day, Veterans Day. Thank you for fighting in wars for us. What are you going to do for me daily?
Yeah. I also like the idea of jobs program in that capacity. And something that we just talked about recently is the opioid crisis here. And it made me think about when we talk about veterans, you've got significant amounts of PTSD, significant amounts of substance use disorder. And then you also have there's a lot of domestic violence. Like there's so many problems in that community, and we don't address those issues sufficiently. We really don't. And it shouldn't be up to nonprofit organizations to come in and fill the gap. Like when I see those ads for Wounded Warrior and all those things, it's nice that exists, but yet
shouldn't have to.
Right. But then I'm sitting there thinking, why would we need that if we took care of our people? That's what all I think about when I see that. And so they need jobs, and a lot of them can't get jobs because they have substance use disorder. And so there's this vicious circle of can't get a job, substance use disorder, homelessness. And I just think that it's a huge problem in the veteran community.
When I retired, I went and worked in the Pentagon. If you remember from my last days, I mentioned somehow I ended up working with Doug Feith and Paul Wolfowitz, when I retired. And I was just miserable, as you can imagine. But with that said, a former boss that I had worked for, they knew I was very radical about taking care of our war wounded, especially when we were going to an ill-advised lying war in Iraq. And I got this call back in 2008 about representing the Air Force and taking care of our war wounded. So up until May of this past year, I went from the Air Force to the Army and became the DOD's contract program manager for the Wounded Warrior Program, the actual sanction, not the Wounded Warrior Project, as you talk about, those organizations, those nonprofit organizations. But I was actually working with the Wounded Warrior Program. And when you talk about the opioids, and that was another problem for our veterans, when they were coming back from war and all the pain that we're in, we were putting them on opioids, and now they are just absolutely addicted to them. And so that's a serious issue right there with the opioids with our veterans.
And it keeps them from, one, getting jobs, and it keeps them, two, from getting housing. And so it's really interesting to me, the intersectionality of all of these things, because you really put them in a position where they have nowhere to go. They're not going to get services. We shouldn't need a VA. We should just all have healthcare and mental health care. We should just all have that. And it shouldn't be a special system. But they need special programs. They need special, assistance. Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.